So the pin should be where the new end of the sleeve is going to be. And you start with the sleeve inside out. Make sure the lining is separated from the sleeve itself. And then there are usually two places where you have to separate. And then begin to lay the sleeve out so that the vent is in the middle on the top. And iron. Okay, so then you want to check and see where your sleeve is going to end. Here's my pin, the sacred pin that you do not take out until you're almost finished. And since it's down past the interfacing, I need to put new interfacing in. Okay. Alright. That's just doing one quick motion. But you don't want to iron over this seam. So cut it right before then. Okay. So now we are ready to make our new hemline, or cuff line, whatever you want to call it. So find the pin and put the ruler up right over top of the pin if you can, to make a mark all the way across the sleeve and try to make it straight. You can double check to see if it's straight. And then you transfer this line to all sides of the sleeve. So inside, and underneath. You can't really make your chalk lines too heavy at this point. Okay, then you need 2 inches margin to work with. So measure 2 inches down the sleeve from that line. And you can check to make sure your chalk line is close to the pin, which it is. So with no further ado, I'm going to cut off the excess. Okay, now we're ready to start putting the sleeve back together. So you take this top part, this is the non-mitered side of the vent, and you fold it on the chalk line with right sides together and pin it. You're going to end up sewing right about there. Now you can start making the miter. So you take this side that's folded, this is your mitered side, and you fold it again on the chalk line. Make sure it's all lined up down here. And then where all of these fabrics are intersecting here, you make a little X with your chalk. So once you take this apart, these are the marks you get from that. You want to transfer these two little marks to the back of the fabric. Okay. And now take something, the seam ripper works well, to hold down the fabric. Go to this little intersection where the chalk and the fold line meet, and you have to match these 2 points. So keeping the seam ripper down and the fabric in place, just sort of lift one side of the fabric to meet the other mark there, and pin them together. So now we need to actually make the line that we're going to sew, and for that we again use this fold line for reference. So we're going to use the point where it comes to the edge of the fabric, where I just made that little chalk mark, and I'm going to connect that to where this mark meets the edge of the fabric. That's the miter line, and that's what we're going to sew. Okay, so I'm going to sew these two things. And the last thing we need to do at this stage is fix up the underarm seam. So I always like to just make sure this seam doesn't keep splitting. So I'm just going to quick sew right over top of that seam. And then we can actually take out the sacred pin and fold the underarm seam on the chalk line and pin it in place. And then you're going to reach in there and grab the seam allowances and stitch them together right at the top with a little tack. So now, when you take that pin out, the sleeve is going to kind of stay in place. Now you can start turning everything right side out. So one side has the miter, the angled seam, and the other is going to lay with the seam flat. and you can start ironing if everything looks good. So you want to fold the rest of the sleeve on this chalk line. Okay, at this point, before you stitch the vent together, you should kind of peek and make sure everything looks good. And yeah, they're matching up, and it looks like it's at the right angle, so then you have to redo the vent stitching. So pin the vent in place where it is falling naturally and where it looks good. You only want to pin the first 3 layers of fabric, so the bottom part's hanging free. And then when you go to sew this in the machine, you you want to actually sew together these 2 pieces in here, and so you need to get this excess folded fabric out of the way. And on the back side too. And wherever the seam is stopped, depending on how far you had to take up the sleeve, just sew from there down to partially inside the vent. Try to keep this part as straight as you can. You don't have to go too far. You can always see how far you went and add more. That's fine. So that part's done. Now we can reattach the lining. So you want to lay the sleeve out and pull the lining back over it. Make sure everything's nice and straight. You don't want your sleeve to twist inside. Iron out the old seam. And then you need about 2 fingers worth of extra width to reattach it, so cut off your excess. And to get in there and start working, you open this underarm seam. There's some top stitching in there. And you only need to open enough to get your hand through the hole. Okay. Then you reach inside there and grab the underarm seam of the lining and of the cuff of the sleeve, and you want to kind of fold that lining over and match those seams and grab them both and pull them out and then pin them right away so you don't lose them. Whole thing out. So you start pinning the edge of the lining and the cuff together, circling from this center pin to the right. You go all the way up to the vent. Do not sew over top of the vent. So there's my vent. That's where I stop pinning. Then you go back to your center pin again and move to the left. And again, you stop just before the vent. So when you go to sew this part, you can begin underneath the vent and go all the way around to the top. The vent, so that's where I'm going to stop sewing. And you take all these pins out. Then you can turn the sleeve lining back to right side out. And this part of the sleeve should be done. So you can close up the lining and just top stitch over it again. Last thing we need to do is put the buttons on it.
Can I say something?
Mm-hmm.
That lining's really ugly. It's our training thing. We can say that. It is.
Can I borrow that?
Yes.
Oh, the camo lining?
The camo lining is really ugly.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
It's like, oh, let's be really classy and wear a suit, but
have the
put trashy lining in it.
I know.
Right.
Why do they? Oh.
You can never iron it too many times. So I'll definitely iron it before you put the buttons on.
Pressing performs miracles.
Yeah, it does. This might look better. Okay. So the buttons go on the top of the vent, and they go 1/2 inch in from the vent and 3 1/4 up from the bottom of the sleeve.
Yeah.
It's just us that's gonna be seen anyway. You could sell it and make money.
I could.
Yeah.
I double my thread, and then that way you only have to crisscross or each button once, and it goes faster. So the one thing I do when I'm sewing the buttons on is I never peek through the lining. So just try to keep a hand under there and feel what you're doing. And I put the center of the first button on that little X. Don't put in the buttons too tight, or they'll bunch up and kind of look funny. I swear the buttons are like the longest part.
I know, right?
How long have you been taping? Does it show you a time on there?
22 minutes.
That's not bad.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Honey, I think that's good.
I don't know.
That's really good. I'd be like an hour.
I mean, no, I think that's good. And in fact, it doesn't even seem like 22 minutes.
It says you get 30 minutes to do 2 sleeves.
Yeah, well, okay. In what worlds?
These buttons do not actually get used, so don't worry about tying them super tight or anything. Just one little knot will do. And steam your marks off, and you're done.
Right. Good job, Libby. You guys.
Good job.
Our audience, Shelly.
Oh, yeah.
And our videographer.
Severe
Severe!
We're done. Okay, I'm gonna stop.